The sleek black limousine cruised through the bustling streets of Houston, Texas, its glossy exterior a sharp contrast to the weathered buildings and cracked sidewalks along the route. Inside, Melania Trump sat composed and graceful, her vibrant red dress a striking burst of color against the car's luxurious leather interior. In her meticulously manicured hands was a stack of note cards, the speech she was preparing for the charity event glinting faintly in the dim cabin light. As the car wove through neighborhoods burdened by poverty, Melania's gaze drifted to the world outside her tinted window. Children laughed as they played on rickety playground equipment, their joy an ironic echo against the backdrop of struggle. Elderly residents fanned themselves on sagging porches, their faces etched with resilience and fatigue. The stark disparity between her life and theirs weighed heavily on her mind, an unavoidable truth that clung to the air like the Texas heat. "We're almost there, Mrs. Trump," the chauffeur announced with calm professionalism. Melania nodded, turning her attention back to her notes, though her focus waned. She had attended countless charity events during her time as First Lady, yet today felt different. Perhaps it was the raw poverty she had just witnessed or a nagging doubt about the true impact of these fleeting appearances. The car glided to a halt in front of a weathered community center, its peeling paint and faded sign speaking volumes of its age. Taking a steadying breath, Melania prepared herself for the public's gaze. As she stepped out, her security detail quickly closed ranks, forming a protective barrier around her. Agent Stevens, the lead Secret Service agent, scanned the area with practiced vigilance. "All clear, ma'am," he said, his tone low and assured. "We'll escort you to the entrance." Melania offered a practiced smile and fell in a step with her assistant Claire, who clutched a tablet with a harried expression. "We're on a tight schedule," Claire reminded her in a hushed tone. A brief speech, some photos, and then on to the next engagement. The small entourage had barely made it halfway to the entrance when a shadow darted from behind a dumpster. The Secret Service agents reacted instantly, closing ranks and reaching for their weapons. "Stop right there!" Agent Stevens barked, his stance commanding. Melania's heart raced as she glimpsed a small figure, a girl in a tattered blue dress, frozen in fear at the agent's response. "Wait," Melania said firmly, placing a hand on Stevens' arm. "It's just a child." The agent hesitated but relented, patting the girl down to ensure there was no threat before stepping aside. Melania knelt gracefully, meeting the child's wide eyes. Dirt smudged her face, and her worn dress spoke of hardship beyond her years. "Hello there," Melania said softly. "What's your name?" The girl fidgeted with her dress, her voice barely audible. "Poppy." "I'm 9. It's nice to meet you, Poppy. Where's your mother?" The girl's lip quivered. "I don't have one. My dad, he's sleeping in the alley, in a tent." The words hit Melania like a physical blow. Intellectually, she had known of such conditions, but seeing them embodied in this vulnerable child was profoundly different. "Are you hungry, Poppy?" Melania asked, her voice thick with emotion. Poppy nodded hesitantly, her eyes darting as if ashamed to admit it. Without hesitation, Melania reached in her purse and withdrew some cash. Spotting a hot dog stand nearby, she handed it to the girl. "Go get something to eat, sweetheart," she said with a warm smile. "Why don't you get some hot dogs for you and your dad?" Melania suggested softly, extending the cash toward Poppy. The girl's eyes widened at the sight of the money, but instead of reaching for it, she did something unexpected. She threw her small arms around Melania in a spontaneous, heartfelt hug. For a moment, Melania froze, acutely aware of the dirt and grime that would inevitably cling to her expensive dress. But then, something within her shifted. She wrapped her arms around the child, returning the embrace with genuine warmth. When Poppy pulled away, Melania didn't glance at her dress or show the slightest discomfort. Instead, she gently tucked a strand of the girl's hair behind her ear. "Go on," she said with a soft smile. "Get your favorite kind and something to drink too." Poppy nodded, her face lighting up as she scampered toward the hot dog stand. Melania rose to her feet, her thoughts whirling. "It's heartbreaking," she said quietly to Claire, who stood nearby, watching the exchange with a mixture of surprise and concern. Children living like this? What kind of circumstances lead to such a life? Claire nodded empathetically as they resumed their walk to the community center entrance. It's complicated. Some children are born into poverty, but others fall into it after their families face hardships. Job losses, medical bills, addiction. There's rarely a simple answer. Melania frowned, a pang of regret stirring in her chest. I wish I'd been here from the start. Attending halfway through for a brief speech and a few photos feels insufficient. Claire gave her a gentle smile. Mrs. Trump, you have a packed schedule. This approach ensures you can attend more events and maintain security. Skipping the opening also avoids crowds, as you know. Melania nodded as Claire guided her through the doorway. You read the event summary I sent last week, didn't you? Claire asked. Of course, Melania replied, though her thoughts were still on Poppy. That's why I agreed to participate. But seeing it firsthand, it feels different. Claire offered a knowing look as she ushered Melania into the main hall. You have a soft heart, Mrs. Trump. It's one of your best qualities. Now, let's get you in position for your speech. The community center's modest hall buzzed with activity, the scent of coffee and pastries mingling with the faint perfume of well-dressed donors. As Melania entered, conversations hushed and heads turned. Her red dress was a striking beacon of elegance amid the simple decorations, and the organizers beamed with pride at her presence. Guided efficiently by Claire, Melania made her way to the small stage at the front of the room. Sponsors stood a little taller, their company logos prominently displayed on banners around the space. Taking her place behind the podium, Melania surveyed the room. The carefully crafted speech she had rehearsed flowed smoothly from her lips, her voice clear and poised. She spoke of community support, the importance of charitable giving, and the tangible impact of events like this one. Yet, as she scanned the polished crowd, her thoughts drifted back to Poppy. We must remember, she said, her voice carrying a heartfelt weight, that behind every statistic is a human story. A child who goes to bed hungry, a family struggling to keep a roof over their heads, a veteran who has given so much for our country now finding themselves without support. As the audience listened intently, Melania couldn't shake the image of Poppy in her worn blue dress. The words she had so carefully rehearsed now felt hollow, inadequate against the raw reality she had encountered. Your generosity today, she continued, forcing herself to focus, will make a real difference in the lives of those who need it most. Together, we can build a stronger, more compassionate community. The room erupted in warm applause as she concluded. Melania managed a gracious smile, but an unsettling discomfort lingered within her. The polished event felt worlds apart from the harsh realities she had glimpsed just outside its doors. After the speech, Melania was ushered into a flurry of photo opportunities. Event organizers posed eagerly, their excitement palpable as they stood beside her. Sponsors stepped forward, keen to capture their moment of charitable pride. Years of public life had trained Melania well, and she maintained her practiced smile, appearing fully engaged despite the turmoil swirling inside her. As the cameras flashed and hands were shaken, her thoughts returned to Poppy. Had the girl bought hot dogs? Was her father awake now? And what would happen when this brief act of kindness was just a memory? The check signing ceremony was the final act, but it felt particularly hollow. As Melania held the pen and smiled for the cameras, the dissonance between the day's polished proceedings and the unvarnished truth of lives like Poppy's was impossible to ignore. Melania's pen glided across the oversized check, her signature crisp and deliberate. The amount was substantial, but as the applause filled the room, she couldn't help but question its adequacy. How many meals, beds, or opportunities for a better future could it truly provide? As Claire orchestrated their exit, a routine perfected to avoid crowds and ensure security, Melania's thoughts lingered on the disparity between the event's polished veneer and the harsh realities just outside its doors. As they moved toward the exit, exchanging polite farewells with attendees, Melania's mind wandered. Was Poppy still outside? Had she bought the hot dogs? The brevity of their schedule, once a logistical necessity, now felt like an escape. a means of avoiding uncomfortable truths. Relief at leaving mingled with guilt. Melania could leave, but children like Poppy had no such option. "You did wonderfully, Mrs. Trump," Claire murmured as they approached the door. "Right on schedule. The organizers are thrilled." Melania nodded, summoning a smile for the event coordinator, holding the door open. Stepping into the glaring Texas sun, she was momentarily blinded by the heat and brightness. The transition from the air-conditioned interior to the sweltering outside was jarring, but nothing compared to what followed. Out of nowhere, protesters emerged, their presence sudden and jarring. "Charity is a band-aid on a broken system," one shouted, his voice raw with anger. "Tax the rich," another yelled, brandishing a crude sign. The Secret Service reacted instantly. "Protective formation now," Agent Stevens barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The agents moved with precision, forming a shield around Melania as two particularly aggressive protesters attempted to breach their barrier. The situation escalated quickly. Gravel and sand flew through the air as agents restrained the protesters. "Mrs. Trump, we need to get you to the vehicle immediately," Claire urged, her voice unusually tense as she gripped Melania's arm. The limousine's engine roared to life, the chauffeur expertly positioning it for a swift escape. Melania allowed herself to be guided toward the car, her senses overwhelmed by the cacophony. Just as she settled into the back seat, a small, frantic voice pierced the noise. "Don't drive!" Melania turned to see Poppy sprinting toward them, her blue dress fluttering as she dodged between adults. "Don't drive, please!" she cried, her voice shrill with urgency. Before anyone could react, protesters who had broken free from the agents began chasing after Poppy. Yet, instead of fleeing, the girl planted herself in front of the car, arms outstretched, blocking its path. "Don't drive!" she screamed again, even as gravel pelted her from the fleeing protesters. "Ma'am, we need to leave now," the chauffeur insisted, his voice tight. Melania hesitated, her eyes locked on Poppy. "Wait," she said firmly, placing a hand on the door handle. Ignoring Claire's protests, Melania stepped out of the car. The remaining protesters had scattered, but Poppy stood her ground, trembling yet resolute. "What is it, Poppy?" Melania asked, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Not safe," Poppy whispered, pointing at the front right tire. The chauffeur hurried to inspect the tire, and his sharp intake of breath drew everyone's attention. "Ma'am," he said grimly, "there's a knife wedged in the wheel." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Agent Stevens bent to examine the tire, his expression dark. "This was deliberate," he said, his voice low. "They must have planted it while we were distracted. If we had driven off, he didn't finish, the implication heavy in the air." Melania's gaze returned to Poppy, who was now being gently questioned by an agent. "How did you know?" she asked softly. Poppy shuffled her feet, glancing down. "I saw them do it," she admitted, "but I didn't want you to get hurt." The weight of the girl's words settled over Melania. Poppy, a child who had every reason to distrust someone like her, had chosen to intervene. Her bravery had likely prevented a disaster. As agents conducted a thorough sweep of the area and local law enforcement arrived, Melania stood by the car, her red dress vivid against the gritty surroundings. Her eyes remained fixed on Poppy, whose blue dress was now streaked with dirt. Despite the chaos, the girl seemed calmer, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Melania knelt beside Poppy once more, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were very brave." Poppy looked up, her wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and pride. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt," she said quietly. In that moment, Melania realized this encounter had shifted something within her. Poppy's courage and selflessness had revealed a raw truth that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't just about giving. It was about seeing, understanding, and truly engaging with the people she wanted to help. And this little girl, with her tattered dress and unwavering spirit, had taught her that. As sirens echoed in the distance and the agents ensured their safety, Melania felt an unshakable determination take root, a resolve to do more, to be more, for those like Poppy. She didn't yet know how, but she knew this moment would change everything. Melania ignored Claire's whispered protests as she knelt before Poppy once more, meeting the girl's wary gaze. "Poppy," she began softly, "thank you for what you did. You were incredibly brave, and you kept us safe. Are you okay? Those people were throwing things at you." Poppy shrugged, a gesture far too resigned for her 9 years. "I'm okay," she said quietly. "My dress is dirty, but it doesn't matter. My clothes are always dirty anyway." The simplicity of the statement, free of self-pity, tugged at Melania's heart. Before she could respond, Claire stepped forward, her concern evident. "Poppy," Claire said carefully, "I heard those protesters call you a traitor. Did you know them?" Melania, her curiosity piqued, nodded slightly, encouraging the child to speak. Poppy hesitated, her small hands twisting the frayed hem of her dress. "It's okay," Melania reassured her, her voice kind. "You can tell us the truth. We just want to understand." Taking a deep breath, Poppy's words tumbled out in a rush. "I knew them. My dad and I, we were part of their group." A heavy silence fell. Agent Stevens stepped closer, his body taut with vigilance, but Melania raised a hand, signaling him to wait. "The group," Poppy continued hesitantly, "they hate rich and famous people. They say charity is just for photos and doesn't really help." Melania felt a pang of guilt at the accusation, remembering her own doubts earlier in the day. She took a deep breath and asked gently, "Did you know about the knife in the tire?" Poppy nodded, her eyes downcast. "They told me to come to you this morning. They said it was to teach me something." Melania's heart sank. The seemingly serendipitous encounter that had touched her so deeply was, in fact, orchestrated. "So when I gave you money for the hot dogs," Melania began, trailing off as the implication sank in. "They said that's what rich people do," Poppy admitted, her voice trembling. "Give us little things but never really help us." Agent Stevens, who had been silent, interjected firmly. "Mrs. Trump, we need to remove the child now. Her association with this group poses a significant risk." "No," Melania said decisively. "She confessed to us. She needs protection." "Protection?" Claire's voice was skeptical. "She lives on the street. We can't." Melania cut her off. Turning back to Poppy, her voice softened. "Why did you warn us, Poppy? Why leave the group? Weren't you scared?" Without hesitation, Poppy looked Melania directly in the eyes for the first time. "Because you hugged me this morning. You didn't care about your pretty dress getting dirty." "I love pretty dresses too," she added, glancing at her own stained, worn outfit. Melania felt tears sting her eyes. Without thinking, she asked, "Can I hug you again?" When Poppy nodded, Melania enveloped her in a warm embrace, unbothered by the dust and dirt. In that moment, the trappings of her position melted away, leaving her as simply a woman comforting a child who had endured far too much. As they parted, Poppy's face took on a determined expression. "I can help you catch the man who put the knife in the car," she said firmly. "Agent," Stevens, intrigued, leaned in. "How?" "His name is Mike," Poppy explained. "He lives in the same alley as me and my dad." Suddenly, fear clouded her features. "Please," she begged, "you have to help us. If you don't, they'll hurt us for betraying them." Melania felt a surge of protectiveness. She turned to Agent Stevens, who nodded grimly. "We'll protect you, Poppy," Melania assured her. "You and your father. Can you show us where this alley is?" Poppy nodded, pointing across the street. "It's right over there." As the group prepared to investigate, Melania realized this day had become far more significant than a routine charity appearance. She was no longer a figurehead at a fundraiser. She was directly involved in a moment that could change lives, including her own. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Melania, surrounded by her security detail, stood at the alley's entrance. The air felt heavier here, the city's noise muffled as if the narrow passage existed in a different world. "Cancel all my appointments for the day," Melania instructed Claire, her voice resolute. "This is more important." Claire's eyes widened, but she complied, tapping swiftly on her tablet. "Mrs. Trump," Stevens said gravely, "I advise against you personally entering the alley. It's not safe." Melania nodded. I'll stay at the back, but I'm not leaving Poppy alone. With a curt nod, Stevens dispatched 2 agents, who moved silently into the shadows. Poppy clutched Melania's hand, pointing toward a dilapidated structure with a rusty door. "That's where they meet," she whispered. Minutes felt like hours as Melania waited, her arm protectively around Poppy. Suddenly, shouts erupted from the alley. "Police! Don't move!" The door was forced open, followed by a brief scuffle. Melania instinctively pulled Poppy closer. Stevens' earpiece crackled. "Several apprehended," he confirmed, including a man matching Mike's description. As the suspects were let out, one man glared at Poppy with unrestrained rage. Lunging forward despite his restraints, he spat, "You little traitor rat!" Melania stepped in front of Poppy, her protective instincts stronger than ever. "Enough," she said, her voice steady, staring him down. For the first time in her role, Melania felt not just the weight of responsibility, but also the power to truly make a difference. Melania instinctively stepped in front of Poppy, her presence shielding the girl from Mike's venomous threats. Agent Stevens immediately intervened, his voice sharp as. He ordered the officers to remove Mike from the scene. Despite being restrained, Mike continued shouting, his words laced with malice. "This isn't over. We got people everywhere. You can't protect them forever." Poppy trembled against Melania's side, her small frame racked with fear. Melania knelt to comfort her, her voice gentle but firm. "It's okay," she assured. "You're safe now. We won't let them hurt you or your father." Poppy nodded, her wide eyes shimmering with both fear and relief. "What about my dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Melania glanced at Agent Stevens, who was already coordinating with local law enforcement. "We'll find him," she promised. "Can you show us where your tent is?" Poppy hesitated, then took Melania's hand, leading the group deeper into the alley. Melania felt the weight of her responsibility grow with every step. This was no longer a symbolic gesture or a public appearance. It was a moment that could change lives, and she was determined not to fail. The alley seemed like a world apart from the city bustling beyond its confines. Tattered tarps and faded fabrics stretched between buildings to form makeshift shelters. Shopping carts overflowed with meager possessions. The air was heavy with a mingled sense of decay and desperation. Melania's polished red dress, now streaked with dust, stood out starkly against the grim surroundings.